March 14th, 2002. My father looked down at my report card and chuckled with disgust. An A minus. You really think an Ivy League school will waste their time on mediocrity? I stood there. Fists clenched so tight I could feel my nails digging into my palms. I was 14 years old. A sophomore at Westminster Academy, one of the most prestigious and expensive private schools in Detroit. In my mind, I had won 5 A's and 1 A minus in advanced physics. The hardest class in school, but to them, that one imperfection was all it took to label me a failure. By May 2nd, 2024. Joe and Paige, my birth parents, had lost everything. 4 luxury car dealerships. Gone. Their names, once associated with Detroit prestige, were now splattered across headlines for tax fraud, wire fraud, and federal money laundering. Over $4 million in assets seized. And I wasn't there in the courtroom. I didn't need to be. The documents I had quietly sent in had done their job. My name is Alan. I'm 36 years old. And this story begins at a gray concrete column inside Milwaukee Mitchell International Airport. That's where I stood. Under flickering fluorescent lights. With $47 in my pocket. No phone. No identification. And no one knowing where I was. 14 years old. Freshly abandoned by my own parents as punishment for not being perfect. If you've ever been discarded or diminished by your own family, if you've ever been told you're not enough by the people who should have loved you unconditionally, drop your city in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone. And if you're thinking, no parent would ever do that to their kid over a single A minus, keep listening. I remember that day, not because everything changed overnight, but because everything collapsed in 30 seconds of silence. It started in my father's office, a space wrapped in imported oak and leather, reeking of expensive cigars and fragile male ego. Framed photos of him shaking hands with Michigan governors lined the walls like holy relics. A plaque by the door read Joe Whitman, Vision, Leadership, Legacy. I walked in, clutching my report card like it was the Holy Grail. For once, I thought I'd done enough. I thought I'd see pride flash across his face. Instead, I got a smirk. I don't pay 20 grand a year for Westminster, so you can bring me trash, he said coldly, not even looking up from his chair. My mother appeared from the hallway like a ghost. An A minus means you gave up. That's a mindset problem. She took the paper from him, shook her head like she'd just found a stain on a Versace dress. A few hours later, they said they were bringing me along on a business trip to Milwaukee. You'll learn what real work looks like, my dad said. It'll be good for you, my mother added with a strange little smile. I was stupid enough to believe them. I packed for 3 days, folded my shirts neatly, even brought my half-finished English essay. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was a peace offering. Maybe they wanted time with just me. Maybe they were finally seeing me. On the flight, they acted perfectly calm. My dad read Forbes and chuckled occasionally at articles like he was in on some private joke. My mom reapplied her lipstick, glanced at me with that same unreadable smile. We landed at 11:30 a.m. No bags collected. No rental car. Instead, my father led us directly to the departures terminal. At the time, I didn't question it. Alan, wait right here by this column, my mother said, pointing to a spot near the security checkpoint. We'll be back in 30 minutes. Your dad forgot something in the car, and I have a few calls to make. Can I come with? You're 14. My dad interrupted with a chuckle. Half an hour alone won't kill you. Consider it training. I stood by that column. 30 minutes. Then 45. Then an hour. I walked around. Checked every coffee shop. Every waiting area. No sign of them. Tfo Ukluk came. I spotted my father moving through security alone. Brisk pace. Phone in hand. I screamed his name. Ran toward him. He saw me. He looked right at me. And he smiled. Not a father's smile. Not warmth. Not regret. It was satisfaction. Figure it out. Son, he said, loud enough for nearby travelers to turn their heads sation for Libby. Time to learn what the real world looks like when you don't perform at your best. Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. And I just stood there, staring at the place where he vanished. Unable to move. Unable to breathe. I stood motionless for what must have been 10 minutes. My breath shallow. Me pose erratic. People moved past me in slow motion, families hugging. Businessmen checking watches. Kids dragging cartoon-themed suitcases. And me, just a 14-year-old kid in a too big hoodie, gripping a duffel bag, replaying the last words my father ever said to me face to face. Figure it out. Son, it wasn't a punishment. It wasn't a lesson. It was an execution. Eventually, the buzzing in my ears subsided enough for me to check my wallet. $47. A student ID from Westminster. No cell phone. This was 2002. Most kids my age didn't have one yet. My parents believed giving children phones made them soft. I didn't even have a way to call a cab, let alone fly home to Detroit. I was 800 miles from anyone who remotely cared whether I was alive. So, I did what they told me. I stood by the pillar. I stood and waited. Half an hour passed. Then another. At some point, a security officer approached me. She was maybe in her mid-40s, with short blonde hair and a sharp, tired expression that softened when she saw my face. "You've been here a while, son," she said gently, crouching to eye level. "You okay?" That's when it happened. My whole body shook, and the words tumbled out of me like marbles spilling from a broken jar. I told her everything about the report card. The trip, the strange behavior, the cryptic comments on the plane, the smile my father gave me as he disappeared through security. Her name was Detective Monica Ramirez. She listened quietly, jaw tightening, with every detail I offered. "What your parents did isn't discipline," she said, her voice steely. "It's criminal child abandonment. A felony under Wisconsin law. You are not in trouble, but we are going to make sure you're safe while we deal with this." Within 20 minutes, 2 Milwaukee PD officers showed up. Detective Paul and Officer Emma. Paul was older, the kind of man who looked like he'd seen the worst parts of humanity and stopped being surprised. Emma was maybe in her late 20s, visibly angry, as I recounted the story for the third time. "You're saying they flew you here just to leave you?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said. Detective Paul pulled out a small tape recorder. "I need to get your full statement. Don't worry, we're going to take care of you. Just start from the beginning." So, I did. The A-. The sudden trip. The column. My dad's final words. I remember the way Detective Paul nodded after I finished. "This isn't just a mistake," he said. "This is premeditated. And in Wisconsin, that's a Class 2 felony. We're talking up to 7 years in prison." By then, the Department of Children and Family Services had been called. A woman named Carol arrived. She wore a gray pantsuit and carried a leather briefcase like she meant business. She sat down beside me in the waiting area and spoke with a calm professionalism that put me slightly at ease. "Alan, I'm sorry this happened to you," she said, gently. "You are safe now. We'll make sure you're taken care of while the legal system holds your parents accountable." She'd already tried contacting them, called every number they'd ever listed: home, office, dealership. No answer. She coordinated with Detroit PD for a welfare check at our address in Buckhead. When the Detroit officers finally made contact that evening, they documented the interaction carefully. According to the officers, Carol told me later, "Your parents seemed surprised law enforcement was involved. They claimed they were trying to teach you resilience, that they planned to return in a few days." "A few days," I repeated. Stunned. She nodded. "They said they wanted you to work through it independently. In a city you've never been to? With $47, no contacts, no plan." That night, I was placed with an emergency foster family just north of Milwaukee, the Carvers. Tom was a high school principal. Susan was a registered nurse. They had 2 kids of their own, Katie, 16, and Elias, 15. They'd been emergency foster parents for over a decade. "This is temporary," Carol told me during the drive, "just until we assess the situation and determine next steps." The Carver house wasn't fancy. It wasn't huge. It didn't have marble floors or valet service, but it had warmth. The walls had family photos. The kitchen smelled like real food. Tom helped me carry my bag in. Susan showed me to the guest room, which had plain blue sheets and a nightstand with a small reading lamp. Katie and Elias gave me polite nods from the staircase. Curious, but not unkind. "We're glad you're safe," Susan said. "We'll get you some clothes tomorrow and make sure you're set up for school. Tonight, just rest." Rest. As if I could. I lay awake in that unfamiliar bed, my mind replaying that moment in the airport over and over again. My father's voice echoing like a curse. Time to learn what the real world looks like. I was learning. All right. But not the way he intended. The next morning, I sat at the Carver's kitchen table staring into a bowl of cereal that had long since gone soggy. Across from me, Tom was reading the newspaper, occasionally glancing at me like he didn't want to push. Susan moved around the kitchen like she had done this 100 times because she slid a brown paper lunch bag onto the table. "Ham and cheese," she said softly. "Let me know if you prefer something else next time." I muttered a quiet thank you and folded the top of the bag with shaking fingers. That day, they enrolled me at Kenosha Township High School. The guidance counselor asked no questions, just smiled politely and said, "Let's find you a good fit for now." My transcript from Westminster arrived within hours. It was pristine, minus the one A- that started this entire spiral. At lunch, Katie, Tom, and Susan's daughter sat with me. She didn't say much, just passed me a juice box from her tray and asked if I wanted to join her and Elias for movie night later. I nodded. It was strange, this unspoken kindness. No one asked me about Detroit. No one asked about my parents. And for the first time in years, no one compared me to Brandon. Speaking of Brandon, he hadn't reached out. Not a call. Not an email. Not even a whisper of concern, which told me all I needed to know. I had always been an afterthought to him, a footnote in the saga of his perfection. A few days later, Carol visited me at school. She pulled me aside gently. "The Milwaukee County prosecutor is pressing forward," she said. "There will be charges. We're looking at aggravated child abandonment, child endangerment, and reckless conduct." He blinked. "How much time could they get?" 3 to 7 years, she replied. "But they're lawyered up. Top firm in Detroit. Their strategy is clear: minimize exposure. Paint this as an overreaction." "Will they get away with it?" I asked. Her pause was long. Too long. "We'll do our best," she said finally. "But this isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure you're never in danger again." I nodded. But something inside me cracked in that moment, not from fear, but from clarity. They didn't want me back. Not really. They wanted damage control. And I was the damage. The Carvers couldn't keep me forever. They were nearing capacity with the emergency placements. And DCFS had been working on a more permanent solution. That's when I got the call from Celeste. Her voice was warm. "Steady. We're not here to replace anything," she said. "We'd just like to meet you. No pressure. You can ask us anything." Eric and Celeste lived just outside of Evanston. Their home was different, bigger than the Carvers' place, but cozy in its own way. It smelled like books and fresh laundry. Their dog, Maple, greeted me at the door like I already belonged. Eric was a professor of electrical engineering at Northwestern. Celeste, a clinical psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery for teens. They didn't ask me to open up. They didn't ask me to smile. They just talked. Eric gave me a tour of the house. When we got to the basement, I saw it a full electrical workshop. Clean and organized, with tools and components more advanced than anything I'd seen at school. "You into circuits?" he asked. He hesitated. "A little," I replied. "Show me what you've worked on." So I did. I told him about the lighting panel I built for our church youth group. The way I'd rigged a basic switchboard for my tennis coach to control court lights. He asked questions not dumbed down or condescending, but like he actually cared. That night, Celeste made spaghetti and didn't try to ask about my past. Instead, she told me about the kids they'd fostered before. The ones who stayed. The ones who moved on. She didn't sugarcoat it. "You've been through hell," she said calmly. "You don't have to pretend otherwise. Healing takes time." I didn't cry. I didn't talk. But for the first time since that airport, I slept through the night. After 3 weeks of weekend visits and check-ins, Eric and Celeste sat me down on their back porch. "We'd like to try longer-term placement," Celeste said gently. "If you're open to it," Eric added. "We think you might find your own rhythm here. And we'd be honored if you wanted to make this your home for now." I said yes before they finished the sentence. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a stray dog someone had rescued out of pity. I felt like I had been chosen. Moving in with Eric and Celeste felt nothing like starting over. It felt like finally stepping into a version of my life that made sense. There were no grand gestures. No forced bonding activities. No, this is your room now moment with fake enthusiasm. Just quiet stability. Predictability. Safety. My room had a desk. A real mattress. A lamp with warm light. Celeste made sure I had clothes that actually fit. Eric labeled the basement workshop shared territory. And it quickly became our unspoken meeting ground. I'd come down to tinker. And somehow, he was already there soldering wires. Examining schematics. Asking if I wanted to help. I didn't just find foster parents. I found people who saw me. School no longer felt like a battleground. No one cared whether I got a 98 or a 92. When I got a B+ on a history test, Eric glanced up from his book and said, "Nice work." Then went right back to reading. No interrogation. No guilt trip. No passive-aggressive lecture about wasted potential. Instead of obsessing over perfect scores, I found myself drawn deeper into electrical systems. Eric encouraged me, not by pushing, but by making space. He'd leave engineering journals on the coffee table, ask my opinion on energy flow diagrams, even showed me how to simulate load balancing for an industrial grid. You know, he said one evening as we built a test circuit together, electricity doesn't just flow. It obeys laws. Logic. It's reliable. Predictably. You learn how it moves. And you can control it. That hit me harder than he probably realized. People hadn't felt predictable. My own parents had turned chaos into parenting. But here, in this world of circuits and resistors and clean diagrams, things made sense. Celeste was different from Eric. Where he gave me tools, she gave me silence. A safe silence. The kind where I didn't have to fill in the blanks with fake cheer. She never pushed me to open up, but when I finally did bit by bit, she was always ready. She gave me a journal and said I didn't have to show it to anyone. This is yours, she said. No expectations, no grades, just truth. I wrote in it every night. In April of that year, the prosecutor's office appointed a legal advocate to represent my interests in court. His name was Richard, a former prosecutor who now specialized in child welfare cases. He interviewed me in their living room, took detailed notes, and spoke to me like an equal. Your parents, he said after our second meeting, have shown no remorse. They're focused on preserving their reputation, not repairing the damage they've done. That distinction matters. He submitted a report that didn't just detail the abandonment but the years of emotional neglect that came before it. The impossible standards, the comparisons, the psychological warfare behind mansion walls. The criminal case moved slowly. Joe and Paige's attorneys filed delay after delay. They spun stories in the media about misunderstood parenting and teaching independence. I stayed out of it. I didn't need the public to understand. I just needed the law to hold. One afternoon in October, Brandon showed up. He drove to Evanston in his BMW convertible silver. Spotless. Predictable. I hadn't heard from him in over 6 months. But apparently, he drew the short straw in whatever damage control strategy they were still clinging to. He took me to Atsafe downtown. Didn't even try to make it feel casual. The whole thing reeked of obligation. They miss you, he said, stirring his iced tea with a straw he didn't drink from. I said nothing. They're stressed. The legal stuff is costing a fortune. Dad says the attorneys are 15 grand a month. It's hurting business. That's what he led with. The money, not how are you, not I'm sorry. Not even a simple acknowledgement of what they did. I finally looked him in the eye. Are they sorry for abandoning me? He paused. I think they're sorry it became a legal case. That told me everything I needed to know. Brandon hadn't changed. He was still the golden child trying to preserve the family crest while the castle burned around him. The court proceedings concluded in November. Joe and Paige avoided jail time, thanks to a plea agreement. But they didn't walk away clean. They were fined, placed on 2 years of supervised probation, forced to attend parenting classes, and allowed supervised visitation, only something I had no interest in. They kept parental rights. Technically, but in every way that mattered, I no longer belonged to them. 8 months later, Eric and Celeste asked me if I'd consider adoption. We love you, Celeste said, her voice trembling for the first time. And we'd be honored if you let us become your permanent family. Yes, I said without hesitation. Absolutely. Yes. The paperwork took nearly a year. There were hearings, statements, evaluations. In August 2003, the adoption was finalized. I changed my last name, and with it, everything else. After the adoption, the air felt different. Not lighter, just more solid. Like the foundation had finally been poured and cured. My name was now legally Alan Becker. A new name. A new identity. But more importantly, a new origin. One, not rooted in abandonment or shame, but in choice. Eric and Celeste chose me. And I chose them back. High school, under their roof, was a completely different world. There were no screaming matches over test results. No guilt-laced dinners where silence was punishment. Eric encouraged me to explore. Not just to perform. Celeste helped me unlearn the reflex of holding my breath during family conversations. By junior year, I was already auditing engineering courses at Northwestern. Eric pulled some strings and got me into advanced seminars, usually reserved for undergrads. I thrived. At school, I was just Alan, the kid who knew how to wire a circuit board from scratch, who helped rebuild the robotics team's faulty control system, who quietly earned the respect of every science teacher without needing to boast. Socially, I was no longer a ghost. KT Carver. My old foster sister introduced me to a few people from her college. One of them, Allison, was a math major from Maine Sharp. Observant. No patience for pretense. We started dating my senior year, bonding over differential equations and a shared fascination with power systems. Stanford accepted me with a partial merit scholarship. Celeste cried when the letter arrived. Eric slapped the envelope against the refrigerator like a championship banner. I remember thinking, this is what real pride looks like. This is what it feels like to be enough. Before leaving for California, a letter arrived. It was from Joe and Paige. The envelope was thick, monogrammed, clearly sent from their attorney's office. Dear Alan, we are proud of your academic achievements and your Stanford acceptance. We understand that past family tensions have created distance, but we hope you can recognize that our high expectations were meant to push you toward excellence. We would like to reconnect and explore how we might support your college journey financially and emotionally. With love and respect, Joe and Paige. I handed the letter to Celeste. She didn't say a word. Just read it, folded it, and handed it back. I put it in a folder labeled, "For Records Only," and never responded. Stanford was everything I needed. Intense. Challenging. Isolating at times, but in the best possible way. I immersed myself in electrical engineering. Allison and I lived in different dorms, but studied together almost daily. I interned for a startup that specialized in commercial electrical systems, learning how retail stores hemorrhaged money through outdated power management. By senior year, I co-founded my own company with 2 classmates. We called it FlexChain. Our model was simple: help small manufacturers modernize their electrical systems. Most of these facilities were stuck in the 90s old wiring. Inefficient load balancing. No backup redundancies. We conducted full audits, identified waste, and redesigned their systems to save on energy. Within 8 months, we had over 200 active clients across Florida and Maine. My partners handled sales and logistics. I did the hard part, the technical design, the part that actually made the savings real. In September 2010, we sold FlexChain to a major electrical contracting firm for $1.8 million. My share, $600,000. I was 22 years old. And for the first time, I had leverage. With that capital, I joined the acquiring firm as a senior engineer, then took a supervisory role in Cleveland. Allison and I moved in together in a quiet neighborhood outside the city. She was finishing her PhD in applied mathematics and had just accepted a job at Dell Technologies as a senior data scientist. By 30, I launched my second business this time, my own industrial electrical contracting firm. We didn't do residential installs or cheap commercial jobs. We specialized in complex factory systems, power distribution, backup integration, high-efficiency layouts, real engineering, real money. By 33, I had over 30 employees. My firm was well known in the Midwest. My investment portfolio had crossed the 1 million mark. My name, Alan Becker, meant something. And not because of inherited legacy, because I had built it. Eric and Celeste flew out for the ribbon cutting of our new Cleveland office. Allison hosted a dinner afterward. We raised glasses, toasted to resilience. And Eric, quiet as ever, just smiled across the table like he knew something no one else did. He knew I hadn't just survived. I'd become everything they said I never would. Then the messages started. Facebook friend requests from names I hadn't heard in years. LinkedIn DMs from Brandon. Holiday cards. Mailed to my company's P.O. box in Cleveland. Signed in ballpoint pen love. Mom and Dad. I documented every single one. Filed them in the same folder as that first letter. For records only. I never responded to any of them. Not the cards. Not the friend requests. Not the emails forwarded through my company's general inbox. I didn't need to. By then, I'd learned that silence isn't absence. It's control. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I had outgrown that. What I felt was something sharper, cooler, like a current rerouted through a clean, insulated line. I didn't need closure. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need anything from them. But they needed me. The first real sign of desperation came in March of 2024. I received a LinkedIn message from a woman named Lisa, a paralegal at a Detroit-based law firm. Dear Mr. Becker, we are reaching out on behalf of Joe and Paige Whitman regarding an urgent family matter. Please contact our office as soon as possible. Time-sensitive legal proceedings require your immediate attention. Sincerely, Lisa M. Legal assistant. I deleted it without responding. 2 days later, I got a voicemail on my business line. Then another. Then a certified letter showed up at my house signed for by Allison, who handed it to me with one eyebrow raised. Inside a letter from Brandon. Alan, I know you don't want to hear from us, but I'm reaching out anyway. Mom and Dad are in serious legal trouble. The IRS has filed massive tax liens, and they're facing federal criminal charges for fraud and money laundering. The dealerships are in bankruptcy. They're looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. I've been trying to manage everything, but the legal fees are destroying what's left of our finances. They need help financial, emotional, testimonial. Character witnesses could reduce their sentence. I know you're successful. I know you're angry. But please, call me. I didn't call. Instead, I did what they never expected. I investigated. Public records painted a grim picture. 4 federal tax liens totaling over $2.1 million. FBI raids at all dealership locations. Complaints from former employees, customers, even business partners, all pointing to a pattern of deception that spanned years. They hadn't just committed financial crimes. They had built a second empire. One constructed out of shell companies in Utah and Vermont, double-booked ledgers, and offshore transfers designed to dodge the IRS, but it was one name that caught my attention: Daniel R., a former finance manager for their flagship Buckhead dealership. He had been fired after raising concerns about accounting inconsistencies. A whistleblower. I contacted my attorney. I wanted more than clarity. I wanted precision. We hired a forensic accounting firm in Detroit, the best in the field, specialists in white-collar crime investigations. I paid them $25,000 up front and told them exactly what I needed. Find everything. And they did. They found invoices billed to a children's hospital foundation that Joe and Paige claimed as consulting hours. They found internal emails confirming fake service charges billed to non-existent vendors. They found routing instructions for money being funneled through charitable fronts into personal accounts registered under Paige's maiden name. Nearly $90,000 stolen from a foundation for sick children. That was the moment I stopped being cold and started being furious. We turned everything over to federal prosecutors. Quietly. Legally. A week later, my attorney got a call from Daniel. He'd heard we were poking around. Said he had more, much more. Audio recordings. Photographs. Bank statements. Conversations where Joe explicitly instructed him to falsify revenue numbers, destroy paper trails, and keep 2 sets of books, one for the IRS, one for reality. I knew they'd try to pin this on me someday, he said. I made sure they couldn't. Daniel handed over everything. Dozens of files, emails, ledgers, memos, audio snippets with Joe's voice saying things like, "The IRS is a joke. What they don't know doesn't exist." Paige's handwriting on fake vendor contracts. Brandon's signature on cash logbooks, showing missing amounts over $100,000 undocumented. It was airtight. And brutal. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just handed the folder to my attorney and said, "Send it in." 2 days before sentencing, Paige called my personal number. Somehow, she'd gotten it. Her voice. When I played the voicemail back, trembled with panic. "Alan. Son. We're losing everything. Brandon's going to prison. We know we hurt you, but we're your family. Please, help us." A letter? A statement? Anything. The next day, Joe left a message. "We made mistakes, but we're proud of who you've become. Don't let this destroy our family. Please, just help." I saved both voicemails, filed them under the same folder as the rest, for records only. And I slept like a stone that night, because I knew they had taught me everything I needed to destroy them. The day of the sentencing hearing arrived quietly. I watched the morning news from my office in Cleveland as the anchors recapped the charges: tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement from the Detroit Children's Foundation, the same foundation where Paige had once sat on the board, smiling for the cameras, while money meant for sick kids vanished into her shell companies. I dressed in a dark suit, but not out of respect. I wore it to look like any other bystander, just a concerned party observing justice. Allison walked me to the courthouse steps, kissed my cheek, and gave me a look that said, "You don't have to be here if you don't want to be." But I did. Every stitch of that building reminded me of what I'd lost and what I'd reclaimed. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. Reporters lined the back row. Pompoised. My parents sat to the left of the defense table, their faces drawn and pale. Joe's hair was almost completely gray now. Paige wore a conservative navy suit that did nothing to hide her trembling hands. Brandon did not attend. His absence was noted without comment. The prosecutor rose first. She detailed the scheme: how Joe and Paige had systematically underreported cash sales, funneled millions through shell entities, and siphoned nearly $90,000 from the children's charity. She presented the recordings from Daniel, the forensic accounting reports, the bank records, the false invoices, all evidence we had compiled. It was thorough. It was devastating. And it was legal. When my parents' defense attorney stood to speak, he tried to shift blame to employees, rogue bookkeepers, he said, and to depict the abandonment as an isolated parenting mistake. He pleaded for leniency based on their prior philanthropic work and community standing. The judge listened. Expression unreadable. Then he spoke. In 22 years of practice, he said, I have never seen a more calculated betrayal of trust. These defendants weaponized wealth and status, not only against their own child, but against the most vulnerable in our community. He paused, letting the words sink in. Therefore, the court finds Joseph Whitman guilty on all counts. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2,800,000 in restitution. He looked directly at Joe. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Joe's shoulders slumped. He did not cry. He did not speak. The judge turned to Paige. Paige Whitman. You are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, with $1.2 million in restitution. Your position on the charity board does not absolve you of theft from that organization. Paige began to tremble, tears finally breaking free. She gasped for air, unable to stand until an officer guided her to her seat. Then, the judge addressed Brandon in absentia. Brandon Whitman, for your role in facilitating these crimes, you are sentenced to 3 years of imprisonment and the permanent revocation of your dealer licenses. The courtroom was silent, save for the stifled sobs from the gallery. Not from me. I sat perfectly still. I had no tears left for them. After the gavel fell, reporters crowded the exit. I slipped out a side door and met Allison on the steps. She wrapped her arms around me. The cold breeze carried away the last remnants of anger. I thought I'd never escape. They're gone, she whispered. It's over. It's over. I echoed. We walked back to the car in silence. I didn't need to speak. The verdict had said everything I wanted to say. That evening, I framed the final court documents. I hung them in my study next to a photograph of my chosen family, Eric, Celeste, Allison, and me at our wedding. Underneath, a small plaque read, "Family is what you choose, and justice is what you deserve." I poured myself a glass of scotch, my first real drink. Slow and methodical. I raised it to the photograph, to justice, and I drank. The days after the sentencing were surreal. News outlets replayed the collapse of the Detroit Whitman empire in relentless loops. 4 dealerships gone. Social standing evaporated. Decades of influence reduced to court records. Every headline felt like a curtain closing on that chapter of my life. Back in Cleveland, I returned to my office and my routines. My company was thriving, new industrial contracts lined up, projects scaling, and my reputation as a dependable engineer solidifying. But somewhere between drafting blueprints and negotiating supply contracts, I found myself drawn back to the records I had meticulously compiled. I opened the 4 records-only folder. Inside were letters, voicemails, accounting files, audio excerpts, every piece of evidence chronicling 22 years of betrayal and quiet revenge. I organized them again, adding a few internal memos from the Whitman graft investigations. Everything had a place, a context, and a memory. I realized then that my story belonged not just to me, but to anyone who had ever been discarded for not fitting someone else's perfect mold. The world needed to know how far parents could fall when love became conditional on performance, and how a single individual, armed with patience and methodical planning, we could turn that disappointment into something powerful. So, I took the next step. I wrote a detailed personal account, my name, the dates, the pillar at Milwaukee Mitchell, the A- that started it, all the full story laid out in chronological order, no extra flair, just facts, feelings, and the arc from abandonment to justice. I sent it to one trusted friend in the industry, a journalist who specialized in family and social justice stories. I didn't expect immediate pickup, but within 24 hours, I received an email they were interested in publishing an op-ed series and a podcast interview. I hesitated only for a moment before replying, "Let's do it." The experience was cathartic. Recording the podcast was like speaking at my own funeral, burying the past, exhuming it, and then laying it to rest with dignity. The op-ed ran under my name, shining a light on systemic failures in child protection and the potential for quiet resilience to become a force for real change. Within weeks, letters began arriving not from family, but from readers. Parents who regretted pushing too hard, siblings who felt lost in comparison, professionals in child welfare who promised to push for better protections, and somewhere in the mix, An email arrived from Daniel the whistleblower who'd helped expose the Whitman crimes. He thanked me for giving his evidence the weight it deserved. He'd stayed in the shadows. But together, we had made a difference. That's when I knew my mission had shifted. No longer was I simply Alan Becker who'd outlived a toxic legacy. I was Alan Becker, the advocate, someone who used his story to drive empathy, reform, and accountability. In the soft glow of the office late one night, I opened my journal Celeste's Gift and wrote a final entry. I was left alone to learn the hard way. Now, I choose to teach with compassion, to build rather than break, to offer my hand instead of closing doors. Some lesson lasts a lifetime, but the power to heal can live even longer. I set the pen down, closed the journal, and looked at the photograph on my desk. Eric, Celeste, Allison, and me, smiling at our wedding. Their faces reminded me daily what family truly is. And with that, I finally let the past go. Months passed. And while my public story remained in headlines for a time, life settled into a new normal. My business continued to grow. And my marriage to Allison deepened a partnership, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Yet beneath this stability, I felt an urge to cement the lessons I had learned into something tangible. Drawing on my engineering background and newfound advocacy, I founded the Becker Foundation for Family Resilience. Our mission to provide resources, counseling, and legal guidance for young people who faced emotional or physical abandonment. We partnered with psychologists, social workers, and pro bono attorneys to create a network of support, an alternative to the silence and stigma too many children endured. Launching the foundation was its own form of quiet revenge. Instead of merely dismantling the Whitman legacy, I built something constructive in its place. Every grant awarded, every child matched with a mentor, every workshop on healthy communication felt like reclaiming my past and offering hope for others. At the Foundation's inaugural gala, held in Cleveland's downtown community center, I gave my first keynote address. Standing at the podium, I looked out at a crowd of survivors, families, and professionals. I wasn't abandoned because I wasn't loved. I told them, I was abandoned because my worth was measured by perfection. Today, we redefine worth. Today, we ensure no child is left to survive on $47 and a broken promise. There was a silence that hung for a heartbeat, then applause. Not pity, but solidarity. Later that evening, as I stepped outside into the cool autumn air, I checked my phone. A single message: thank you. Your story saved me. It was from a young man in Chicago, his words a reminder that healing was contagious. On the ride home, Allison reached over and squeezed my hand. You did good tonight, she said. I nodded. For once, words were unnecessary, because action spoke louder than vengeance. Years have a way of reshaping perspective. What once felt like an unending list of betrayals now resembles milestones of resilience. Each moment of abandonment, each courtroom drama, and each sleepless night contributed to who I am today. The pillar at Milwaukee Mitchell remains a silent monument to a single decision to stand alone under harsh lights and discover what I was truly capable of. My work with the Becker Foundation deepened that conviction. I traveled to Washington, D.C., to meet with child welfare advocates and legislators. I testified before committees on the importance of early intervention, of trauma-informed care, and of legal frameworks that prioritize a child's emotional safety over parental privilege. Standing before policymakers, I spoke not as a victim, but as a survivor and as someone determined to turn personal tragedy into collective progress. Back in Cleveland, my company continued to thrive. We expanded into renewable energy projects, designing power systems for schools and hospitals committed to sustainability. It felt fitting, transforming darkness into light, both literally and metaphorically. Every contract we fulfilled carried the imprint of lessons learned in that basement workshop: precision, foresight, and unwavering commitment. At home, Allison and I welcomed our first child, holding her in my arms for the first time. I understood the gravity of parenthood in a way I never had before. I couldn't imagine leaving her alone in an airport terminal, unmoored and afraid, and I never will. We named her Grace, a reminder that even after the greatest betrayals, grâce remain possible. That forgiveness and love can flourish where fear once rooted. One afternoon, as Grace napped, I found myself at my desk. Looking at the framed court documents and wedding photo, my phone buzzed a notification from the Foundation's hotline. A teenager in Seattle had reached out, abandoned by a guardian, questioning his worth. The message read, Mr. Becker, your story gives me hope. I want to talk. I smiled, recalling the countless moments when a single act of compassion had altered my path. I tapped the hotline number and prepared to listen. Because no matter how far I've come, I remember the weight of solitude. And I know that reaching out, even with a simple hello, can change a life forever. As I dialed, I whispered to Grace sleeping in the other room. We're going to make sure he never has to stand alone. And with that, the cycle of quiet, compassionate revenge for every child left behind continues. The impact of the Becker Foundation rippled outward in ways I never anticipated. Emails poured in from families across the country. A grandmother in Arizona wrote about her granddaughter's fear of being sent back to an abusive parent. A group home director in Vermont asked for training on trauma-informed care. A school counselor in Seattle requested our curriculum for teaching emotional resilience to students. With each request, my conviction deepened. Transformation is not just personal, it's communal. One afternoon, I received an unexpected invitation. The Detroit Children's Foundation, the same organization my birth parents had exploited, had restructured its board and reached out to partner on a new scholarship fund. They acknowledged past misdeeds, pledged transparency, and sought to restore trust by supporting children in need. I deliberated. Part of me bristled at revisiting that painful chapter. Yet another part recognized an opportunity to ensure real change. If those funds could be steered toward genuine support rather than vanity projects, perhaps a legacy of well-intentioned resources could rise from the wreckage of greed. So, I accepted. At the first joint committee meeting, I sat across from the foundation's new executive director, a warm-hearted advocate named Mary Ann. She apologized unequivocally for past leadership and invited my input on scholarship criteria. We want these funds to go to kids who faced abandonment or betrayal, she said. Your experience guides our vision. I outlined a rigorous application process, proof of hardship, interviews with trained counselors, and a requirement for recipients to engage in community service. We need accountability. I emphasized it. These scholarships should build character, not entitlement. The room fell silent, and then everyone nodded in agreement. That's when I realized how far I'd come from powerless teenager to respected architect of institutional reform. Outside the meeting, I took a deep breath. Detroit's skyline gleamed across the river, a reminder of my origins. I thought of Joe and Paige, how they once used that city as a playground for their ambitions. Now, it would become a place where generosity, not greed, defined their legacy. That evening, as I drove back to Cleveland, Allison called with news. Grace had taken her first steps. My heart swelled with pride as I pictured her toddling across our living room. It struck me that progress, whether in a child's first steps or in a foundation's mission, comes one small moment at a time. When I got home, I found a message from Daniel waiting. Thank you for helping shape the scholarship program. It means more than you know. I smiled and typed back. One day at a time. I folded that note and placed it in my journal, beside the entry where I first committed to compassion over vengeance. Because quiet revenge isn't about destruction. It's about dismantling injustice and building something better in its place. Winter settled over Cleveland. As snow dusted, the rooftops and streets glowed under lamplight. Inside my home office, I reviewed the Foundation's annual report, case studies of children who had found stability and hope through our programs. Each story felt like a tribute to the journey from abandonment to belonging. A knock at the door interrupted my reflection. It was Detective Monica Ramirez, the officer who had rescued me at Milwaukee Mitchell all those years ago. Her eyes held the same warmth and determination. I wanted to bring you this, she said, handing me a manila envelope. A small token of gratitude from the Milwaukee Police Department. Inside were commendations letters recognizing my contributions to child welfare advocacy and the role my story played in reshaping local policies on child abandonment. Tears threatened, but I kept them at bay. Thank you, I whispered. You set me on a different path that day. She smiled. You carried it forward better than I ever could have imagined. As she left, I realized how interconnected our lives had become across the years. A single act of intervention had cascaded into a lifetime of purpose. That evening, I sat with Allison and Grace by the fireplace. Grace, bundled in a cozy blanket, listened to her mother, Red, the Velveteen Rabbit, her sleepy eyes fluttering with wonder. I watched their faces glow in the firelight and felt the profound weight of gratitude. Gratitude for second chances, for mentors, for the chance to rewrite my story. Before bed, I added one more line to my journal. Every rescue matters. Every gesture of kindness becomes a thread in the tapestry of healing. I closed the book and looked at the crystallized snow outside my window. Somewhere, a teenager was reading our newsletter, tentatively reaching out for help, their own story, waiting to unfold. And I knew that as long as compassion guided my every choice, the legacy of cold revenge would be replaced by a legacy of hope. Spring arrived, bringing renewal and growth both outside and within. At the Becker Foundation headquarters, I walked past framed photographs of program graduates, teens, who once felt abandoned and now stood resilient, smiling at their college graduations or first jobs. Each image was a testament to the power of second chances. That afternoon, I received a call from a documentary filmmaker named Maya Chen. She had learned about my story through the podcast series and wanted to create a feature-length film on my journey from the cold airport terminal to building a national advocacy network. Her voice crackled with excitement as she described her vision: intimate interviews, reenactments of key moments, and on-location shoots in Detroit, Milwaukee, and Evanston. I hesitated only briefly. Years of speaking carefully had taught me the importance of controlling my narrative. Yet something in Maya's sincerity convinced me this was the next step to inspire even more people by showing the full arc of transformation. We scheduled the first shoot in Milwaukee, standing at the same concrete column where I'd been abandoned. I marveled at how different it felt to return not as a frightened child, but as a man who had turned his greatest wound into a source of empathy and action. Maya captured the moment with a single crane shot. The terminal's bustle contrasted against my still figure at the pillar. It was poetry in motion. Next, we traveled to Detroit. I led Maya through the Whitman dealership campus, now shuttered and overgrown with weeds. Rusting signs and empty showrooms bore silent witness to the empire that once stood there. We filmed exterior shots, overlaying archival news clips of the FBI raids. I shared memories of the glossy marble floors and the hushed confidence of luxury sales, then contrasted that with the hollow finality of foreclosure notices posted on the glass doors. In Evanston, we filmed in the basement workshop where Eric and I first bonded over circuits. The soft hum of soldering irons and the precise glow of work lights brought back that sense of belonging. Maya asked me to demonstrate a simple circuit, and as I did, I realized how deeply this space had shaped my identity. It wasn't just about engineering, it was about trust, mentorship, and the quiet strength of connection. Throughout filming, I revisited my journal entries, the raw, unfiltered truths I had written when each chapter ended. I read selected passages on camera, my voice steady but tinged with emotion. These scenes felt like exhaling after holding my breath for decades. When production wrapped, Maya looked at me and said, "Your story will change lives." I believed her. The documentary premiered at a social justice film festival in Chicago. On opening night, as the credits rolled and the audience rose to applaud, I sat beside Allison and Grace, tears glistening in my eyes. For the first time, I saw my journey in a new light, an artifact of resilience ready to speak for itself. After the screening, survivors approached me with gratitude and hope. They spoke of newfound courage to confront their own pasts and seek help. It struck me that the cycle of quiet revenge had expanded into a chorus of collective healing. Back at home, as I tucked Grace into her bed, she looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, were you ever scared all by yourself?" I paused, choosing my words with care. "Yes, sweetheart, but I learned that reaching out makes you stronger." She nodded, eyes heavy with sleep, and whispered, "Okay." Then she drifted off, trusting that, no matter what, she would never stand alone. That night, I added to my journal, "Storytelling is a bridge. We build it with truth, walk it with vulnerability, and extend it with compassion." I closed the book, feeling the final knot of pain unwind. The journey from abandonment to advocacy had spanned years, but each step, no matter how quiet, had led to this moment of clarity. Our stories have the power to transform not just ourselves, but the world around us. Summer brought long days and a steady hum of activity at both my company and the foundation. Projects were in full swing: renewable energy contracts, converting an inner-city school to solar power, and mentorship programs, pairing industry professionals with teens exploring technical careers. The synergy between my engineering work and advocacy felt seamless, both driven by the same principle: empower others to shine. One morning, as I reviewed blueprints for a new grid optimization system, my phone buzzed with a video call request from Marianne, the Detroit Children's Foundation director. She appeared on screen, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Alan," she began, "we finalized the first scholarships. 10 recipients who endured abandonment or neglect, now heading to top colleges with financial support and mentoring. We couldn't have done this without your guidance." I felt a surge of pride at the program's fruition. "That's incredible," I replied. "These kids deserve every opportunity." She smiled. "Your leadership transformed our approach. We're hoping to expand to 20 scholarships next year." We discussed logistics orientation sessions, advisory committees, progress tracking. As the call ended, I reflected on the full circle nature of this collaboration. The very organization my birth parents had exploited was now distributing opportunity to those who needed it most. Later that day, I hosted a site visit at our Cleveland office for a group of scholars and their families. They toured our workshop, met Allison and Grace, and listened as I shared both technical demonstrations and personal anecdotes about overcoming adversity. I saw in their eyes the spark of determination I once had, and I knew the legacy of quiet revenge had given way to a brighter, more inclusive vision. That night, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I took a rare moment on my back porch, nursing a glass of scotch and watching fireflies dance above the garden. Allison joined me, handing me a photo album from Grace's first birthday party. The pages brimmed with laughter balloons, cake smears, tiny hands clinging to a toy train. "Look how far we've come," Allison whispered. I traced Grace's smiling face with my finger. From an airport pillar to this? We sat in companionable silence, the weight of the past lifted by the promise of tomorrow. Before turning in, I added to my journal, "Every act of generosity, no matter how small, illuminates the path for those lost in the dark." I closed the journal, knowing that though the journey began in solitude, it would continue in community, and that truth would guide every step ahead. Zun. Part 15. Autumn returned, painting the city in hues of amber and gold. The foundation prepared for its most ambitious undertaking, yet a national summit on family resilience, to convene survivors, advocates, policymakers, and researchers. It would be held in Washington, D.C., bringing my personal mission to the heart of the nation's capital. On the morning of the summit, I stood at the lectern before a packed auditorium. Banners behind me displayed our hashtag number, Resilience Rises. I looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, diverse in every way, united by a shared narrative of overcoming. My story began at 14 with $47 and no phone. I opened, a whoosh fell, but it did not end there. I outlined the arc from abandonment to adoption, from courtroom vindication to institutional reform. Each chapter underscored the summit's core message: resilience is not merely bouncing back, it's transforming trauma into purpose. The audience erupted into applause. I stepped aside to moderate a panel discussion featuring a foster youth turned lawyer, a trauma psychologist who had guided our seminars, and an educator who integrated resilience curricula into public schools. Their insights wove together policy reform, community care, and individual empowerment. After the panel, I joined small breakout sessions. In one room, a young woman from Seattle shared how the Foundation's mentorship program helped her navigate the foster system and achieve her GED. In another, a former teacher described adopting resilience practices in the classroom to support students facing neglect. By the day's end, legislation drafts were circulating proposals to strengthen mandatory reporting laws, increase funding for family preservation services, and set national standards for trauma-informed care in schools. Witnessing policy take shape felt like the culmination of years of quiet effort and proof that one person's journey can galvanize systemic change. That evening, as we celebrated at a reception overlooking the Potomac River, I raised a glass to the network we had built. Survivors embraced one another. Advocates exchanged contacts. Researchers made commitments to new studies. The energy was electric, a living testament to the strength found in shared stories. I slipped away from the crowd for a moment and gazed at the lit silhouette of the Capitol dome. The same laws that once enabled my parents' betrayal were now being reshaped to prevent future injustices. It was poetic justice of the highest order. Returning to Cleveland, I found Grace waiting with a handmade card, a sketch of our family under a rainbow, labeled Happy Daddy's Day. I hugged her tightly, realizing that every stride forward, whether in courtrooms, boardrooms, or living rooms, was for her generation's chance to grow up without fear of abandonment. That night, I penned the final entry in my journal. Justice is not a destination, but a continuous journey. With each life uplifted, the legacy of resilience expands, and no one stands alone. I closed the book. Heartful, the quiet revenge had been transformed into a choir of hope,